Well, since it's Reformation Sunday, those of you at home may not be able to see this, and those in the back. However, I brought my Playmobil Martin Luther figure this morning, and he even has his translation of the New and Old Testaments into German, into the vernacular. So there's Martin. You can stay there, buddy. And then when I was at General Synod a few years ago, one of the Pennsylvania conference, or one of the four conferences in Pennsylvania, was raffling away a little Martin Luther ducky. And so I won a Martin Luther ducky at the UCC's General Synod, so I'm surrounded by a cloud of Luthers. A story in today's Washington Post caught my eye on this Reformation Sunday. And yes, I do have the bad habit of reading the news while I'm still in bed in the morning. The story details the recent synod of the Roman Catholic Church, which for the first time included women and lay delegates as voting members. Yay! Issues like the possibility of blessing same-sex unions, not marriage, but blessing of same-sex unions, and the possibility of having women serve as deacons were at least talked about, although apparently they expunged all the LGBT language before they published the document. In criticizing more progressive German clergy who are already blessing same-sex unions, one conservative Polish archbishop said that they were advocating reforms that, and I quote, draw profusely from Protestant theology and the language of modern politics. Ooh. You know, as we weigh what our sisters and brothers struggled with during this synod, it's a good time for us too to be considering what it means to be church. It's important for us as a congregation to be aware of what sort of new reformation may be upon us even today. You know, when most of us think of the Reformation, we think of the Augustinian priest Martin Luther in 1517 nailing his 95 theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg, stating his objections to the abuses of power by the church in Rome. And it was a momentous step. But do you think Luther knew what he was doing? I mean, do you think he really thought through that this is going to cause a schism in the Western church? Did he know that it would spark a counter-reformation in the Roman Catholic Church? Do you think he knew that it would result in many wars of religion in Europe that would claim literally millions of lives for nearly 200 years? I suspect he did not. He certainly didn't anticipate that the 1517 Reformation would spawn further reformations across Europe with Calvinists and Anabaptists and Anglicans and Presbyterians and Congregationalists and Unitarians and others. The Reformation is not monolithic. It happened and happens in different places, in different ways, in different times. And it's difficult to overemphasize the critical importance of that 1517 Reformation as a hinge in European history. I mean, it essentially put the last nail in the coffin of the late Middle Ages and ushered in the early modern period. Nothing in the church would ever be the same, except the things that are still the same. You probably know, that was like a Yogi Berra-ism, wasn't it? Yeah. You probably know that about some of the shifts in the Protestant tradition that come straight from Luther. 2 sacraments, baptism and communion, instead of 7. A different way of looking at communion. Transubstantiation was rejected, meaning that communion elements literally turn into the physical body and blood of Jesus. The reliance on Scripture alone as wholly adequate as a resource for religious authority rather than papal pronouncement. Married clergy, direct access to God without needing the intermediary of a priest to get you and God connected. And salvation that is a gift of grace based on faith alone rather than relying on good works as a means of trying to earn merit. Luther himself paraphrased the psalm that David read for us this morning, such that God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble, became a mighty fortress, is our God. This psalm was important to the Reformers as it became obvious that their heterodox, not to say heretical, views meant not just risking their own lives, but that they could be used to incite violence and civil war. Hear these words of the psalmist as you think of the images you've seen this week of war in Israel and Gaza. God makes war cease to the ends of the earth. God breaks the bow and shatters the spear. God burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among all the nations. I am exalted in all the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. It is not the intention of our God or Jesus to use violence, but to secure peace, to break weapons, to call us to be still. You know, one of the questions that someone in the congregation posed for us during the instant sermon this summer concerned what the church of the future will look like. And since none of us received that crystal ball that we were hoping for, the best we can do is to imagine and rely on God's grace and God's guidance moving forward. Some things that we Protestants do right now go back to 1517. Worship is still central to the mission of every church, though of course it's morphed over time. We still baptize infants, even though other Protestants don't. And we celebrate communion. I suspect that the church of the future will continue to do those things, as well as to have potluck suppers. One of the great ideas from our tradition is that we're not just reformed, but reforming. It rests on a Latin phrase, Ecclesia reformata semper reformanda est. The church is reformed and always reforming. Reformed and reforming. You know what that implies, don't you? It's the C word, change. Most of us think that change is fine and necessary, but when asked if we want to change, it's a different story. So I want to acknowledge that change is incredibly difficult at times, especially when everything in your life seems to be changing, and it can almost be embittering when the one thing that you think is really stable, your church, starts to change. One of the things you may not be fully aware of is how dramatically the pandemic accelerated change in American Christianity. You know, because we have invested in great live streaming capability, a sizable portion of our congregation is worshiping from home. And those of you who had any sense, you would be doing that too. But no, you're here in the pews today. But even last Sunday, when we didn't have a snowstorm, more than 70 screens were viewed during our two services. So it's likely that we had 95 or 100 worshipers who were not physically present in the sanctuary, but who are still a part of worship. And we're glad that you are there in the virtual balcony. And we're still adjusting, too, to so many of our folks being online and not in the pews. During the pandemic, we saw the closure of the American Baptist Church, an Abyssinian Christian church here in Fort Collins. Our own denomination has seen a 50% membership decline since the 1980s. 50%. Fewer people are entering seminary to prepare for parish ministry because there are fewer congregations who can afford to have even one full-time clergy person. This year, 12 people comprised the incoming Master of Divinity class at ILIF, where Marta and I went to seminary and where Brooklyn is currently studying. So 12 students started in the MDiv program. When I started at ILIF in 1996, the incoming class was 60, 5 times as large. You know, one of my favorite Roman Catholic writers, Father Richard Rohr, reflects, in North America and in much of Europe, we are witnessing a dramatic increase in nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. People who don't identify with a particular faith tradition. He says, while I ache for those who have been wounded by religion and no longer feel at home in the church, the dissatisfaction within Christianity has sparked some necessary and healthy changes. Episcopal Bishop Mark Dyer aptly called these recurring periods of upheaval giant rummage sales in which the church rids itself of what is no longer needed and rediscovers treasures that it had forgotten. This is a difficult and frightening task, which is why we only seem to do it every 500 years or so. Think back, 1517, 2017, it's been 500 years. So if we look at the history of the church, he says, we can see that pattern. So what Rohr is referring to is the great rummage sale of 1917, the great schism between the church in the East and the Western branches of Christianity, which happened in 1054, the rise of monasticism in the 6th century. So here we are in the midst of another 500-year rummage sale in the church. Today we find the church in Europe and in North America in a stage of decline, ready for Reformation. The funny thing about Reformations is that nobody knows exactly where they're going to lead. Sometimes in the United Church of Christ, we seem to think if we just work harder, you know, that's the old Protestant work ethic, isn't it? If we just work harder, if we do just one more social justice project, if we just expand our program offerings, it's going to turn things around. And to be honest, we've been pretty good at holding back the flood here at Plymouth. But even if, like Hans Brinker, the little boy with the silver skates, we keep our finger in the dike to hold back the torrent, the dam's not going to hold forever. American Christianity, mainline Protestantism, the UCC, and even Plymouth are going to look very, very different in 20 years, even if none of us knows quite how. I think the key to successful Reformation is to get rid of the bathwater and have the wisdom to hold fast to the baby and not throw her out. The 1517 Reformation threw out plenty of bathwater, but there was some baby that got tossed as well. And we've readopted some of those things. You know, for instance, when I was growing up in a New England congregational church, the only clergy vestments we ever saw were black academic robes. Never a stole around the neck, certainly never a cassock alb like the one I'm wearing right now. We adopted those gradually as an acknowledgement of our ecumenism, our relationship with all Christian churches. I never saw liturgical colors growing up. But today I see things differently. I see gifts in monasticism. I'm deeply informed by mysticism and contemplative Christian spirituality and by Celtic Christian spirituality, all of which went by the wayside. Thankfully, we've retrieved some of that tradition. Even something as simple as prayer beads. You know, I'm not aware of anyone who can tell us just what the future of Christianity is going to look like. And that can be scary because we know it will be different and we're not quite sure how. Part of our common task in the coming years is to identify the baby and preserve it carefully, even as we drain the bath water and let it go. It's a matter both of embracing change while conserving the best pieces of our tradition that are central to who we are as Christians. Always reforming means that we have to embrace change and we have to ride the wave. But it also means that we need to spend time doing deep, thoughtful, careful discernment with God about where we're being led to change and why. I pray that we have the grace to listen to the God who is still speaking and who calls us to be the church. May it be so. Amen.